I give a lot of talks these days, and that's funny because when I was in grade 6, I was terrified of public speaking. I would have to prepare them for weeks on end and practice them in the car. And now I mostly give talks to incredibly crowded rooms of people, many of whom have beards. Sometimes they're all standing up and drinking really noisily. It's nice to be here tonight where it's a little bit more relaxed. But in order to ward off my nervousness and kind of make myself seem more like them, I have a thing I do when I give talks in public, and it's that I just sort of, I don't grow facial hair naturally, and I recognize that often you have to have a beard of some authority when you're talking to other beardy people. It just helps everybody get along. So I'm just going to apply my facial hair of authority before we get started. So just give me a minute here. All right, this is my favorite facial hair of authority. It's Salvador Dali. I like it because it makes me look completely insane. So this is my talk about laser-based collaborative spaces. I have a lot of things to say about laser-based collaborative space. I've been involved with the hackerspaces movement for a while now, and about 2-3 years. I was member number 6 at HackLab, and when HackLab decided they were opposed to drill presses, my friend Seth Hardy and I got together and we decided to start Site3, which is our laser-based collaborative space, and we started it based on the principle that I wanted a laser cutter that could both cut and etch in the same job. And that seems like something that shouldn't be that big a deal, but it sort of holds in it the seed of how you make collaborative spaces work, which is that collaborative space works best when people are mutually invested in the space. And the way that you get people to invest in a space is that you get something together that's too expensive for any one person and kind of too unreasonable for them to have, and you let them all throw in together so that they have an investment in it. We use this system for a lot of things without thinking about it. We use it for building roads and building hospitals and paying for all sorts of systems, but that seems like taxes and it seems far removed and it seems super political, which, no lie, spaces like this are super political because they give people the ability to invest in themselves really easily. It takes off a lot of the barriers to education and to involvement with the future that I think we natively believe there to be. And there's not really a lot of reason for those barriers to be there anymore because we have the internet, we have access to the information. The trick is that in order to get that information from the information buckets into people, you have to make it so that people feel comfortable asking the question. This talk is a little bit Toronto-centric, and it's a little bit Site3-centric, but my history is here in Hamilton. I did go to McMaster, and McMaster had one thing that it offered me that was spectacular. It was not the ambiance, it was the 24-hour studio access. When I was in art school, we had 24-hour studio access. We got there, we got to level 3, they handed us a key and they said, "Goodbye, we'll see you in 2 months. Come back with something cool." And we did. We came back with something cool. I came back with a bunch of robots because they put me at the back of a parking lot and I had no water and I had no heat and I had kind of some hydro and the leftovers of the drama department's wood blocks. And that made me happy because no one was supervising my work. I got much better marks in cultural studies than I did in fine art because all I really wanted to do was throw around with robots all the time. That's what I wanted to make. That's what I wanted to do. And my robots frequently blew up, which comes to the second thing that hackerspaces do a little bit better than schools do. Schools grade you, and your investment in school is at this point in the history of North America, I feel it's safe to say it is an investment in your future that is expected to have a given return. You're expected to get a degree out of putting that money down. So you take the money and you borrow it from the bank and you put it down and you get the degree. And a lot of the time that's how our higher education systems work, and that's problematic because we only have one branch, or maybe 2, but really one branch to put people into these days to get curious people back out into the world. And the problem is that if you put a lot of curious people into a place with a lot of people who really want a job, who are not necessarily also curious people, what you get is fighting, and you get a lot of conflict in how you structure your programs and how various people's value propositions are going. And the answer that Hackerspaces has for this is that it gives the curious people who've gotten the degrees the support systems that an art school normally provides outside of having to be in school to get them. So there's a wonderful book. It's called Art and Fear, and I read it very shortly after I left university, and a long time before I ended up actually finding out about hackerspaces while I was still in that long period. You know, the long period. Lena Dunham does movies about the long period. It's a really long period. And what Art and Fear says is that the thing that stops us from doing cool things is that it is not considered normal outside of school to have an interest in cool things. So if you don't have that support network, if it is not normal to do cool things, then you aren't just fighting your own fear, which is the fear of the blank page, which is why we have creative techniques courses and why people go through all of those mind mapping, brainstorming, concept fanning things. That's to get over the fear of the blank page, which is enough on its own to stop most people from even starting. But, you know, once you're outside of school, there's also the fact that quite a lot of society just does not want you to be curious. We aren't set up to support curiosity. Curious people tend to be dangerous, and that's why historically curious people get kind of farmed off to tenure, where they're safe, and they get kept on their shelf of the Amazon. And that worked really well for a really long time. And then we developed the knowledge economy, and it kind of all went to pot. Hackerspaces bring back a place for people to be curious for the sake of curiosity, and more importantly, they make it safe to fail. Because investing in a hackerspace is not as expensive a proposition on any level. Even buying your own laser cutter is cheaper than buying a term's worth of higher education. And that's a problem, because, you know, higher education is obviously having some problems with its value proposition when the tools and equipment that it nominally would provide you are no longer accessible, and then also they're charging you a lot more money. That's an issue that's happening a lot now. Hackerspaces provide a bit of a stopgap for that, if you look at them the right way. I think Site3 is a little bit different than most hackerspaces. Cool logo, bro, tell it again. This is the graphic design. You can see that I started it off there, and then it went to there, and then it went to there, and now we have reflective patches because hackerspaces tend to not get government grants in vast quantity. Usually we make our livings by selling our classes directly and by having our members throw in because they believe in us month and month and month again. So one of the things that it is also about is about getting people to invest in you. Part of that is having a cool enough space. People get lost visiting us. We are next to the subway system. That was a purposeful decision because a lot of the time you have collaborative spaces like Open Studio in Toronto, which are slightly difficult to get to. And the thing is that if you have people who are already very busy, curious, and introverted, you want to reduce the barrier to entry even further. You want to make it as easy as possible. So in our case, we lucked out. We were going to have to be off in the east end of Toronto, which, if you don't know it, is kind of like the west end of Hamilton. It's away from the main action. But we found this space. It's down an alley. It's behind a church. And if you know Toronto, the corner of Ossington and Bloor is also like the coolest district here. I have a joke pin of a little white squirrel on a stick. I was going to show up and say I represent the Toronto Hipsters Hacker Association. I feel like the facial hair does it for me, though. This is the point, is that we wanted to be able to do that for ourselves. And we had no access to that because we live in a major urban center, and that, which is oxypropane welding, is incredibly dangerous. You can't really get insured for it. You can't really do it. So people have become afraid of oxypropane welding instead of becoming afraid of paperwork. The two things have conflated themselves. And having a private club where you can go to have the tools and equipment to do dangerous things with responsible people allows you to get all of the people who learn through doing, which is almost everybody. I think that a lot of the time we would like to believe that we learn through books, and certainly there's a lot of book learning to be had, and I really love Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, and I certainly am extremely keen on all of the things I learned in critical theory. But the thing is that the actual learning of hand skills, which people still love, and the learning of how to use these tools, you have to be able to have space to fail in order to learn these skills. You will not succeed at programming a computer your first time out, and if you do, you won't find out what you're doing wrong until suddenly nothing works, and then it will be days and days and days to learn it. So we wanted to be able to do this for ourselves in the same place as we do that for ourselves. So what Site3 is for us is a place where we can have these super advanced future tools right next door to the tools that have just been going for ages and ages and ages. Laser cutters are the eggs that hatch hackerspaces. So at the start of this talk, I told you that my buddy and I got together and we bought a laser cutter. Why would a laser cutter be especially good for hatching a hackerspace? Well, you have the print studio downtown, or had, it's now Site3. That was an amazing inspiration for how we did this. Again, it's an expensive tool that's kind of tedious to keep clean, and you don't need to use 100% of the time, but somebody should be using it 100% of the time because it can just go all day. Laser cutters are very much the same, except in addition to being able to go all day, they're really delicate. They need a lot of maintenance. People get really invested in maintaining them, and different people get invested at different levels. So I'm invested in maintaining the laser cutter at the level where I now know where all of the parts go, because I have to talk to China to order the parts. But the boys who maintain the laser cutter are invested just because they love laser cutters. They just really, really love CNC machine tools and telling me all about G-code. I do not understand G-code. I do not really want to understand G-code, but I do know because I have been hanging out with a group of people who care about that. But the girl who was welding, she cares about laser cutters because she's designing an eyeglasses line. All of us have one thing in common, and it's the laser cutter, and that's because of something Tabitha Southey said when we were talking about withdrawing our embassy from China, and that is that diplomats talk to aliens. That's what they do. A laser cutter is a bit like an embassy or a neutral ground. Because it seems so incredibly futuristic, while actually being about 30 years old and kind of, you know, not actually that cool. I mean, you tell it to go up and down and turn on and off. That's it. That's all. They're very resilient. They're super good tools. But they're so neutral and so interesting that people who have a completely diverse attitude towards it look at this and they think, one, there's no way I could cut my hand, and two, anything I make will turn out perfectly. Oh, ho, ho, ho. That part is a lie. It is not true at all. But it looks like it is. So you can get a huge and diverse crew of people in to talk to it and to work with the tool because they might only be interested in taking your class once, or you might have somebody teaching the class who really charms people. And that's when you start to get other people in. Because the thing about diplomacy and talking about aliens is that people like people who are like them. People like people who are like them. This is why diversity is important and difficult at the same time. There are some assumptions built into this talk. I assume that everybody here is for diversity in pretty much the same way they are for breathing oxygen, but I also assume that they might not know why. And the answer is the same reason why McMaster's 24-hour studios that were totally unsupervised are a good thing, which is that when you get a whole bunch of people together who have totally different ideas, then your ideas get better because they've been stress tested. They've been stress tested like peer review. They've been stress tested like open software. People have a chance to look over your ideas and go, well, that's okay, except for all that racism you left right there. Can you get rid of that? And then because you are in a supportive environment where you have a neutral laser cutter and everybody really wants access to your one rare random tool that you can't access that's kind of expensive everywhere else, they get over their differences for the sake of the kids, which is to say for the sake of access to the tool. Why is it better to do this in private? Here we go. Warning labels. Counterintuitive at best. We don't have any water at Site3, so the really badly spelled Spanish in the middle is because we have a toilet that's on fire. It's just on fire. We do everything with fire there. That was distracting. Why is it better to have this place in private than it is to have it in a semi-public zone? This is because the only way diplomacy works is by invitation, I think. I think that, and that's why hackerspaces are rad, is because ThinkHouse might not think that, and Quartz Lab might not think that, and HackLab might not think that, but I'm allowed to think that and still be part of the hackerspaces network. You're allowed to have different opinions and still be part of the fraternity. Oh, that's a dirty word in this town. I know that. Here is another reason why it's a good idea to have a private club. That is a hand mill. You use it by hand. It is not controlled by a computer. You put your hand next to the thing that spins, and you feed things through. So private clubs are good because people have to take on a sense of personal ownership and responsibility for what they're doing. And they're also good because you get a chance to vet people in advance. And you can say things like, well, the conditions of membership are pretty open. You sign up for this kind and we hang out with you for a while. And then maybe you want to be a full member and maybe you don't. And full membership is expensive and it comes with voting privileges. And you know, most of the people who are going to be members, they just stand there and look at me and just say, shut up and take my money. Shut up, take my money, take all of it. But other people want to try it out. Other people are nervous. And having it as a private club, a club where we do things personally, allows us to maintain a very old-fashioned model of good citizenship. And I know it's very old-fashioned because I was reading something for something else, and it was all full of Aristotle, and there was Aristotle saying, it is probably best that you get to know everybody personally, because you can't govern fairly if you don't know what people's opinions are. And I'm like, well, that's a couple of thousand years of good citizenship right there. So, it's good to have privacy, because if you have privacy, you can have things like incredibly dangerous handmills. But it's also good to have privacy because with privacy, you can meet new people knowing they will probably already like you. It's good to have spaces like this because nobody really... It's very easy once you're inside these spaces to forget what it is like outside these spaces, especially if, like me, you spend the gross majority of your time inside them. It's easy to forget very quickly how outside of these spaces, outside of universities, outside of schools, sometimes just being smart is enough to get you in a lot of trouble. And that doesn't work in a country that's trying to make itself into the new knowledge economy. That doesn't work. You can have it one way or you can have it the other way, but you certainly can't have it both ways. So it's good to have a community where you have people like you who say they're like you and who prove they're like you with their brains. It's nice to have spaces like that to hang out in. That's one of the reasons I love it there. Site3 is a little bit different than other spaces in that because of the fire and the active danger, we're getting to the rainbow gun. The rainbow gun will be here eventually. Site3 encourages a level of risk-taking that is perhaps not matched by other places in the world other than perhaps the Chaos Computing Club in Berlin. We hear they do terrifying things with actual politicians. So, you will meet new people, they will probably already like you. You know that because you are interested in even a single nerdy thing, and nerddom will get you access into places. After that, you have to have someone who's willing to talk to the aliens. And that is why one of the hackerspace patterns that doesn't come up very much, I'm about to put gender theory into my beautiful clean laser talk. It's best to get one girl. The reason is that girls are aliens. This is gender theory, which is that neutral is boys, not neutral is girls. So if you get at least one girl, you have at least one alien already on side, and she can talk to the other aliens along with everybody else, and that is how it ends up working a lot of the time. I hope that in future it will not work that way. Right now I was given my first facial hair of authority by my dear friend Adina, who used to help run Think House. Get some girls in. The way you get girls into spaces is by inviting them, and then cleaning up the space, and then inviting them again, and then when they come for 1 hour and leave, invite them back the next week. You just have to keep doing this. This is also how you get female speakers to talks. It's a very popular topic on the internet right now. So, action shots. People have to participate to care. It's not always enough. If you want to build your membership, it's not really enough to just have a class where people come and learn a single thing at a single workshop. It's best to grab them at a party and be like, here's a badge and a pile of LEDs. And then they'll go, this badge is a circuit board and I don't know what you do with LEDs. And you go, there's a soldering iron. Just give us 5 minutes. And then send them home with a skill and also include them. Everyone loves to be included at the party. And the thing about community groups is that the more you include people at the party, the more they will think nicely of you and want to come back, and the more your space will prosper. We are not the first to have thought of this. There are a lot of groups that work this way. Originally, they were engineering clubs, but before that, they were other things. Churches do that sometimes, but I try not to talk about that because then people think I'm part of a cult, and the facial hair does not help. So, nichrome smelter. Lauren made this. Lauren, the smelter, showed up in the alley one day, and there was just some spitting aluminum sparks, and I went, you cannot possibly do this here, and she said, do you want me to stop? And I said, no, just carry on, but know that you can't do it here. Lauren now distributes nichrome wire, which is what's in your toaster, for most of Canada. She and her boyfriend, Paul, just start collecting things and doing insane things with them at our workshop. We get to have a lot of really fun stuff, because these people just sort of showed up. We made it, they came. I cannot emphasize how much luck and just being willing to include people and work with them is important to that. It is the most depressing thing ever, isn't it? You just, you have somebody show up and say, oh yes, by the way, a lot of it is luck and just talking to people again and again and again, but that is how you put groups together. That is Lauren the Smelter. That is her doing that thing that is not happening. That is a Van de Graaff generator, which are great fun. A Van de Graaff generator, if you hook up 4 of them, you can stop someone's heart with it. We did not try that, but you can. So when I say things are dangerous, what I mean is things are dangerous, but they're not so dangerous that we would not have kids to our space. Yes, we are all show-offing adults who are showing off for each other, but part of the personal responsibility and inclusiveness in the community is that it's good to do things like occasionally host the Boy Scouts and teach them to make steam whistles. We don't just do Arduino, we don't just do 3D printing. Our most popular class is the wet molded leather mask making workshop, which I run once every 2 or 3 months. I was taught to do it by a master leather worker who lives in Milton. He used to be a member of our space, but he lives in Milton and we are in Ossington and Bloor. Have a variety of classes for all levels of involvement, because you never know where somebody who is going to make a huge difference will come from. You never know who will learn to program an Arduino to make LEDs blink in their mask, and then the next thing you know, they're programming your RepRap. They're programming your 3D printer. They've developed some insane surgical bot. They've made your laser into an insane surgical bot. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm just waiting. Here are some other projects. This is The Typewriter That Plays Games With You by Jonathan Guberman. He was one of our original members. He found us, the shop, and he is remarkably ambitious. His project right now, however, is his very newborn son. That happens. When you run a hackerspace, you have to have the minors and you have to have the new people, because people get married and have kids, and starting a space is not, as they say, just for Christmas. It's for all year long. That's the Pactuator. He got a cease and desist for it. I remain forever envious of his cease and desist for the Pactuator. That's a Rubens tube. It's a standing flame tube. They work incredibly poorly, but they look really cool when they do work. What it is a tube full of propane, and then you light the top of it, and you run a standing wave, which is a sound like boo through it, and then you can see the wave, which is really cool. It's a form of sound visualization. That is Dana Serafinshin's head. We made a vacuform table. We basically just make things. And one of the things that people miss is they often look at me and they say, why? And I look at them and I say, what do you mean, why? Vacuform table. My favorite hacker is Jerry Ellsworth, and I met her once when I was a young hacker, and she was carrying a purse that had a Commodore 64 built into the side, and you could play it. And I thought, okay, we can do this. You just have to make things. You just have to let yourself have fun. And again, that's the difference between the higher education thing and a hackerspace, is you don't have a mark. No one is going to grade you. There's only a pass-fail course, and the pass is it awesome yet? And if it's not awesome yet, why don't you just, maybe we're just going to work on it together and we'll make it awesome. And then you stick it on the internet with everyone's name on it. Not one person's name, everyone's name. Because that's how you say thank you when you have a volunteer-driven space, is you say thank you to your volunteers. You list their names, you acknowledge their credits, you give them a t-shirt, you bake them cookies. Volunteers are how your space will run. Even when they pay in to be there, they're still volunteers. And the problem with volunteers and the joy of volunteers is you can't fire them, but they sure can quit. Not fair. Life is not fair. Vacuform table. This is Seth Hardy's Shannon's Fireflies from Nuit Blanche 2011. So one of the joys of being in Toronto that I think is going to really come to pass here in Hamilton as well, because it's been coming to pass for a good long while now, is we have this huge art thing called Nuit Blanche, and we can sometimes build amazing things. And one of the advantages that hackerspaces and tech art has over some other kinds of art is that tech art lends itself to being interactive, and interactives are fun because the artist actually doesn't get to say anything about how the interactive works. When you build an interactive, the point is the interaction. That's my artwork halfway up there. I'm very proud of it. The interaction is dictated by your audience. You just make the thing. You make the thing and you say, well, I made it, here it is, go nuts. So Shannon's Fireflies was, as you can see, a gigantic cube, and what you would do is flash a light and then it would transmit through in random jags. And sometimes the other side would form exactly the right pattern from the first light. And the theory behind it was that if you hear a word with switched syllables, you can still understand the message. So it was a love note. I really enjoyed it. This is mine. These are 80 tiny edge-lit pigeons. These are both mine, actually. So this is 80 tiny edge-lit pigeons that I did for the decompression party a few years ago. They have UV LEDs buried in them, which are throwies based on Graffiti Research Lab's throwie, which is a light-emitting diode taped to the sides of a battery. But then I used my laser cutter to cut and design a whole series of pigeons that folded together in that traditional way, you know, the birds that bob up and down. These didn't bob up and down, but anyway. I put together a cloud of 80 of them and I stuck them under a black light and they were very popular. This is some of the more conventional artwork we've done. That is some of the less conventional artwork we've done. The brass knuckles come from a friend of mine. My friend and I make jokes on the internet, and then when we're done laughing, like the entire creative process for places like this, when you've gotten over the fear of the blank page and you have a supportive community and you know that whatever you make, you probably will have somebody enjoy it, yeah, then you are really free because you're not isolated anymore. You aren't alone. The worst thing that we've come up with as a species ever is to isolate someone. And there's a difference between privacy and having a trust in the privacy of what you say and a confidence in the people around you, and isolation. And there's nothing worse than the myth of the solitary artist, because they don't exist. They just don't exist. And when they do exist, they're insane, because humans are social animals. We have to talk to other people. If that were not true, then there would be worse punishments than locking people in a box. But there aren't. So when people go off to their garret all alone, always alone, to write their great novel or to do their great painting on their own with no one else and no input, yeah, that makes you unhealthy. And that's why the acknowledgements pages are there at the back of the book, is because nothing ever comes out of one person working on their own except being afraid of the dark and the white. Da-da. So, why is Site 3 different from other spaces? One, we encourage you to finish your projects. Many hacker spaces encourage you to hack on projects and maybe work with projects, and sometimes that can go for years. Site 3, if you start a project, you tend to receive deadlines from your friends in fairly short order. Like, when is that getting done? My deadlines are enforced publicly across an international sphere by people occasionally emailing me and asking about the rainbow gun. It's not done yet. December. We are quite confident in teaching people to use really dangerous things. So mills and lathes, that was the smallest mill. We also have an old-fashioned Bridgeport. You can ask me about that after the show. Limited liability insurance. If someone falls down our stairs, that's okay. That's okay. We have insurance. Have insurance for your space. Things go wrong. No matter how responsible people are, things go wrong. You don't want to be on the hook for something terrible after something terrible has already happened. We have not-for-profit status, which does not exist in America. The States does not have that. So take advantage of not-for-profit status because it means your stakeholders, heaven forfend, are your board and your members, not shareholders. This is important. And this is a garage for the future people want to see. That's what Site 3 is. So what we're known for. This is what we're known for. We are known for flame effects. Site 3 has within it a team of people called the Site 3 Fire Arts team. We take gigantic flame effects to Burning Man. I like to leave Burning Man to the end of the talk because otherwise it expands to fill the space aloud. This is a picture of Super Street Fire, which is our 2-year project, which is an interactive fighting game where you basically do interpretive dance with gesture detection gloves on, and if you accurately throw a fireball from the 1995 game Super Street Fighter, the fireball will show up. It does not actually immolate a child. We went to some effort to get that shot. A word on flame effects. There's some police officers and fire safety guys. Propane effects are subject to gas codes from the United States of America. They are not to be trifled with. They are, pardon the F-bomb in there, they are extremely dangerous. And that makes the people who handle them usually very safe because all of us have to have certifications that are more or less equivalent, like we could plumb this building for you and it would be okay because that is what it takes to do major scale flame effects. Again, how did we get into this? It seemed like a terrible idea at the time and then we did it anyway. We all just thought that flame effects were cool. Honestly, that was it. And we started to work on them, and we worked on them and worked on them and worked on them, and now we get to go to various parties and demonstrate really cool fire stuff. And a non-trivial amount of Site3 are invested in that. If you try and get in touch with us in the last week of August, Jonathan, who is home with his child, will say, I'm sorry, all of the officers, the majority of the board, and 90% of the members are not available right now. Because we like doing flame effects, and also because this is a team sport. You know, it took a software team and a concept team and me doing graphics and designing a color system, which did not get hooked up, but still. It takes a team to do things that are this big. It takes a team to have big effects, and it's funny because people hate group work. And if you asked any of the people involved, they'd say, oh, I got group work. I don't like group work. And then you get them together and you say, so there are 20 of us and we have 6 months to put this together, so what part are you doing? And then suddenly you're working in a group. And I think that that's another thing that we could maybe take back to conventional education, because if you call it collaboration and you get people to work with the people they want to work with on projects they are interested in at whatever level, that tends to see better results than just assigning people things. Because when you assign people things, then, well, we all have day jobs. That's what your day job is for. And if it's a day job, it's a day job. But if you're spending your time doing it for fun, if you are paying for it, probably you should be interested in what you're doing. So this is Super Street Fire on the right. Super Street Fire did start out at Burning Man 2012. This, however, was its first outing. It was at Firefly Festival in Vermont in 2011. We go to most of the Burning Man regionals in the States because, again, it's harder to do flame effects in Canada than it is in the US. On the other hand, it's easier to organize them here because we have not-for-profit status. Super Street Fire, cooperation makes for a happy time. This is the slide where I'm supposed to talk about group work. I did the logo, but my buddy Rob, who does concept art, did all of the layouts and all our engineering documents, and then I'm putting together a book of it, and that means that we worked on it together. Gloves, these are the gloves for it. That was the version one of them. They are XBs and an accelerometer shield from SparkFun, and we can talk about that after. I know a little bit about them, but I was not on the development squad for the gloves. They feed through an XB and a mesh net to a computer where they do real-time tracking of positions, and then we have a custom JavaScript that tells us what people did and feeds back a series of sound effects from 1994. So the Rainbow Gun. The Rainbow Gun was a wonderful project for me, and this feeds into a different talk, which I am going to skim over, because the Rainbow Gun is my first major project that I really took on for myself after the birds, and what I learned is that rapid prototyping is great, but also, you know, prototyping is fantastic, rapid prototyping is fantastic, rapid prototyping is more expensive faster. It's expensive to prototype, it's more expensive faster to do it rapidly. So I designed some beautiful switch casings, I worked with fuel injectors, there is an early variant of it on a stool. I worked with somebody from the aesthetic studio who did all of Calgary's museum installations, because she showed up at one of my talks and was like, that sounds cool, why don't you use a router to do it this way? And I learned to use a router. And eventually it worked. Eventually it worked. That is a slide of it blowing up green fuel all over our floor in the model where it took 4 people to hold it down and a bicycle pump to drive it. And since then, I've done things like welded a proper case for it and added extra stuff to it and worked on it for months. And the Rainbow Gun was my introduction to people who hack on things for the sake of hacking, because previously I had made things to deadline, and it was my introduction to the world of play. Which is what people like to talk about a lot when they're talking about new spaces, but what they mean is giving themselves a chance to just mess around with things for fun for a while. I do not have the Rainbow Gun here tonight because it requires special licensing to detonate the Rainbow Gun. No. We'll bring it to Think House sometime though, I promise. So that is my talk on laser-based collaborative space. Those are some of my thoughts on aliens and how you assemble a space like this. I think I'm just under the limit there, and that's a picture of me in our alley next to Site3 talking to all of the police and fire officials and the fire chief for the West End of Toronto on account of the fact that I had been testing the Rainbow Gun without a license. Anyway, they told me not to do it anywhere other than major parking lots 20 feet away from buildings. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for being a wonderful audience. And if there are any questions, I would love to talk to you about them.